Hey guys, Corey from ID Parts here, and this is a video of me doing my automatic transmission fluid and filter change on a 2005 Jeep Liberty CRD. This is pretty straightforward. If you've done automatic transmissions before, it might look familiar. First thing we're going to start out with is loosening all the bolts around the transmission pan itself. I'll accelerate it here, that way you don't have to look at all. I'm just going to crack them loose. I don't want to take them out yet, because otherwise I'll make a pretty big mess. Now with all of them cracked loose, I'm going to ditch this ratchet and switch to an electric drill to speed things up a bit. I'm going to start taking the bolts out from the back to the front, but I'm not going to take the ones in the front out. These 5 bolts here I'm going to leave in place. That way the pan doesn't drop down. I'll speed things up here just on fast forward, that way you don't have to watch it all. Now that I've got all those bolts out, I'm going to loosen those 5 bolts that I circled. Take a couple turns off of them, that way I can break the pan loose, but not have it fall down on me. Once those bolts are loose, it's time to try to pry the pan away from the transmission. The gasket's going to hold it in place, but I like starting at the front where the bolts are still in place, just in case the gasket gives way, the pan doesn't fall on you. Just crack it a little bit, and here we go. We've got some fluid coming out. I'm going to try to catch it in the pan and basically wait for it to drain out slowly. That way I can move to the other ends of the pan but not get covered in fluid. This will take a while, so I'll grab my screwdriver and pry it open here just to speed things along a little bit. That way I can move to the back. Now as I'm doing this, I'm really trying to keep it in the oil drain pan here. The transmission fluid, it's a lubricant. Obviously, it's real slippery. If you get it on the floor, it's going to track everywhere. You might slip and fall, so try to contain this mess as much as possible. If there's a drain plug here, it'd be a lot easier, but unfortunately we don't get one. So I'm just going to keep prying it down and letting it drain into my pan just systematically. And again, moving my drain pan there as much as I can to keep the mess contained. Once the fluid stops coming out, we can loosen up the front bolts a little bit more and get a little bit more fluid out. There'll be still some in the pan. I like to do this systematically. You can go for it if you're feeling aggressive, but I just take one bolt out at a time, let the pan come down slowly, and let the fluid drop out into my pan just little by little. Now that I've got all the fluid out, I'll take this final bolt out of here and drop the pan off the transmission and onto the ground. Now with the pan off, we see the 2 transmission filters. The pan filter is right here, and it's held on with a Torx T25 size screw. It's kind of weird for a Jeep. It's all over Volkswagen, so I've got one of these, but if not, pick one up. You're not going to be able to use anything else to get it out. It's a small screw, not much torque on it. I just use a screwdriver. Once that pops out, the filter can get wiggled down, and there's going to be a little fluid in it. Try to catch it, but it's pretty simple to remove just like that. With the pan filter out of the way, you want to inspect the pickup tube O-ring, which is located right next to that spin-on transmission fluid return filter. I'm going to replace this one. It looked kind of beat up. Usually they're in pretty good condition, but if you need to replace yours, take a hook tool, just pull firmly down on it, just like I'm doing here. Don't damage the tube that it's in, though, and it should pull right out. Once you've pulled it out, just take the new one, line it up in place, and use a mallet, a socket and a mallet to tap it into place until it's flush. And after that, my camera batteries died. But all I did was take off the transmission fluid return filter. It's that silver spin-on filter. Just unscrew that and screw the new one on, and then we can move on. The next thing to do is clean out the transmission pan itself. I'm just using brake clean to spray out all the old fluid and get any residue or any particles that are in the pan out. What you'll notice here is bottom on the left, on the bottom of the transmission, is this small little magnet. It's going to be full of shavings. Basically, those are just metal shavings from the transmission. You want to clean those off with a rag. That way you don't put a dirty magnet back into your transmission and then put it back in place. I didn't record this, but you also need to take a razor and remove all the leftover gasket that's on that pan. You're going to have to install a new gasket, so it's important that you get all that old gasket off. That way the new gasket can seal up nicely. We're just going to use a bead of high quality RTV and go around the outside of the entire pan. We've installed the new return filter and the new pan filter in place, and now it's time to get the transmission pan lined up. RTV will stay pretty much fluid until it gets heated up, but we don't want to move the pan around too much, so we're going to line it up as best we can the first time to minimize any shifting and minimize creating any leaks in that gasket. One trick is to catch the bolts, two bolts that are diagonally opposite from each other. That way the pan can be held up and in place while you secure all the other bolts. Once I've got some securing bolts, I'll swap to my electric drill and install the rest of the bolts around the whole pan. And like any job, you want to go around all these bolts one more time with a hand ratchet just to be sure you didn't miss any. Once those are all tightened up and double checked, the next step is to refill the transmission with fluid. For the purposes of this video, I'm using this basically transmission fluid fill tool from Ossenmacher. It's a pretty nice design. It's got a 6-liter container, and you're just going to pour the fluid right into the container and then pump it into the transmission. I have this tool because a lot of Volkswagens use bottom fill style transmission fills, and this makes it a lot easier. But for a CRD, you could just use a funnel with a tube on it. Basically, that'd be just as easy. Anyway, we're going to pour all 5 liters into this pump and pump it into the transmission using the dipstick tube as the fill point. And while this is filling, we can talk about how to check the transmission fluid level. After you pump all the fluid in, what you're going to want to do is start the car, let the transmission warm up. It's going to let the fluid get into all the places that it drained out of, and that's going to give you much better reading on your dipstick. Checking the transmission fluid level is just like checking your oil level. Pull out the dipstick and look at the fluid line as comparison to the marks on the dipstick. If your transmission is cold, you want to be at this second dot in. If the transmission is hot because you've already driven around, you want to be at the third dot. You don't want to be below the first or above the fourth, as underfilling or overfilling the transmission can do damage. If you're happy with the level, wipe off the dipstick tube, put it back in the car. Go for a test drive to be sure everything is okay. That's it for this video. If you have any questions, email us, sales@IDParts.com. And as always, subscribe to our channel to see the latest and greatest videos right as they come. Thanks very much for watching.